morning, everyone, and welcome to Pasadena City College's Cesar Chavez Day celebration. My name is Kuei Dang, and I am the Executive Director of Student Equity and Success, and on behalf of our area, Institutional Equity, Diversity, and Justice, in partnership and collaboration with the Association of Latino Employees, we are honored to have you all here today as we commemorate the life and legacy of Cesar Chavez. As many of you know, Cesar Chavez was a visionary leader, a tireless advocate for social justice, and the co-founder of UFW, United Farm Workers. UFW continues to this day to be one of the most influential labor unions in the country, and their dedication to nonviolent activism and community organizing led to significant labor reforms, ensuring dignity and fair treatment for thousands of workers. This year holds a special significance as we mark the 60th anniversary of the Delano grape strike and boycott, a pivotal movement led by UFW that reshaped labor rights and demonstrated the power of collective action. Beyond improving the lives of farm workers, the boycott ignited a wave of activism, inspiring a generation of college students to become community organizers, advocates, and leaders in the fight of justice. That legacy of student-led activism continues today as college students remain at the forefront of movements for workers' rights, immigration reform, and social equity. As we reflect on this history, we recognize the principles of Chavez and the UFW fought for: dignity, respect, justice, remain as vital today as they were then. At a time when our communities of color are facing increasingly attacks due to the political national climate, it is more important than ever that we come together, uplift one another, and continue the fight for justice. Chavez taught us that we are stronger when we are united and together. Today and every day we show up for our students, we honor his work by reaffirming our commitment to advocating for fairness, inclusion, and human rights. Thank you again for being here today. And I hope our time together is one small way to fill our souls with hope and connection, for showing up every day and fighting the good fight in service of students. At this time, it is my pleasure to have our board member, Francesca Chaboya, Ethnic Studies faculty and History faculty, to continue to welcome you and share a little bit more history and introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Hola, buenos dias, good morning. How is everyone today? My name is Francesca Chaboya. I am an instructor here. I teach history and ethnic studies here at PCC. I also am the Educational Awareness Chair for ALE, which is the Association of Latina Employees. What we do on campus is really try to advocate and organize and support our Latina employees here. But we also recognize that we work with students in various capacities, so we really try to extend our community to students as well. And just in general, really try to advocate to embrace our Latina identity and heritage and culture here on campus. So we're really grateful to share this space with y'all. Before we begin, I really want to ground us in a land acknowledgement and acknowledge that we are on indigenous land. And I feel like that's especially important since the topic for today is crisis at the border. And when we think about the regions that we're referencing, it's important to acknowledge that we're referencing regions that are on indigenous land. So I hope that we're mindful of that as we engage in this conversation. I also want to make a labor acknowledgement because we can also understand that the United States was founded at the expense of enslaved Black people and also exploitative labor forces as well. And especially today as we engage in this conversation centered around and really thinking about César Chávez, who himself was an advocate for farm workers and a labor force that was historically exploited as well, I feel like it's important to acknowledge both the land that we're speaking about, that we are currently on, and this labor acknowledgement. So as we are here to honor César Chávez, who, as I said, and we know, is an organizer within the farm workers movement, he was also the co-founder of the National Farm Workers Association, which eventually became the UFW. He, alongside union leaders, advocated for a minimum wage, collective bargaining, and in general, just really mobilized to acknowledge that farm workers were deserving of these things. To normalize and accept that farm workers deserved the respect and deserved to be valued, that their skill set was valuable. In saying that, it is also important to acknowledge all parts of this history, including that while Chavez did take pride in his Mexican identity and did dedicate his life to organizing, he also did take a stance against immigration and undocumented workers, who were initially left out of this labor movement. This was at a time when anti-immigrant rhetoric was on the rise in the United States, despite the fact that the United States heavily relied on migrant labor forces under the Bracero program. But when the program ended, in general, there was this anti-immigrant rhetoric that blamed immigrants for being strikebreakers, for keeping wages low, and in general, undermining the labor movement. And so, since then, and eventually, Chavez did voice his regret for this exclusion. And the UFW evolved to be an inclusive organization. And in fact, to this day, the UFW remains an advocate for all workers, including immigrant workers as well, and undocumented workers as well. So I don't mention this to invalidate his important work, but instead to acknowledge the imperfections and complexity of any movement, to know what lessons can be learned. So from this, we learn that workers in vulnerable positions are often purposely divided in an attempt to dismantle the power of unity. We can learn from the power of collaboration and unification, as Chavez organized alongside leaders like Larry Itliong, who was a Filipino farm worker who organized the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, and he eventually joined forces with Cesar Chavez, and together they founded the UFW. We can also learn that the Black Panther Party and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, also helped organize with the UFW and organized information and literature to support the UFW's boycott efforts. So these communities unified under their shared interest of combating oppressive systems and valued collaboration. So these are all things that we can also learn from their activism. So today we are here to continue learning and to reflect on conversations around organizing, labor, migration, and justice. Our guest, Julio Ricardo Varela, is a journalist, commentator, and advocate whose work centers on the voices and struggles of Latina communities, particularly immigrants. His advocacy stands as a testament to how the fight for justice has evolved, expanding to include immigrant rights as a core part of labor and civil rights. By engaging with his work, we honor Chavez's legacy, not just by remembering his contributions, but by continuing the conversation he helped spark. This movement has not ended, but is evolving with continuous opportunities of learning. So today we reflect on history while looking ahead on how we can build a more just future for all workers, regardless of borders. So please join me in welcoming Julio Ricardo Varela.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Oh, come on. I know you just had this amazing breakfast. I'm looking at the chilaquiles, and I'm like, I want the chilaquiles, but let's do that again. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. All right, there we go. So I'm a writer. So I always like to write my speech, and I spent almost the entire day on Tuesday. So basically, I'm going to share my remarks, and we'll get through it. But then what I want to do is turn this into a dialogue and take your questions. And I'm here until you need me here, because all I'm going to do is go see friends in downtown Los Angeles who I haven't seen in about a year. So thank you for inviting me to speak today about what we're all witnessing in our country now, and the complicated legacy of Cesar Chavez, whose day we're going to celebrate on March 31st this Monday, and how that legacy can help frame us, can help frame the moment now. But before I begin, I need to acknowledge two things. First of all, this is the disclosure. What I say are my thoughts and my own opinions. I'm a working journalist leader with several jobs because I'm Puerto Rican. And like people say, it's like if you're like Latino, like you have like 4 or 5 jobs, right? So I have 4 or 5 jobs, and none of what I say represents any of my employers today. This is only me and me only, Julio Ricardo. So I also want to say that this year has been a year. for all of you here in the Pasadena area and throughout Southern California. I've been doing work in this area since the early 1990s when I was developing and editing bilingual textbooks for K-6 students throughout all the public schools in California. Ever since then, so I'm from the East Coast, right? Heading out to the West Coast has been my oxygen. Every time I come out here, I leave inspired, hopeful. You know, I started in publishing, I ended in journalism. But the one thing I've learned about being out here all the time is you all never forget the importance of what community means. And I just want to thank you for that. And even though I'm an East Coast kid from Puerto Rico, and please don't tell anyone on the East Coast, the West Coast is the best coast. I know, right? Thank you for laughing. I have a couple more, so we're setting it up. There's always been a cultural and community connection here, just talking to a couple of students before and telling me that, yeah, I'm taking Chicano studies and Mexican American studies, and I'm like, yay, good for you. So I say this from the bottom of my heart. When I saw what y'all experienced a couple of months ago, I wanted to go through the screen and be here just to be with community. And I know it's hard. And this is my first time back. I try to come out here about 10 times a year. And I just see power and beauty and hope here. So I want to have this dialogue with y'all after I get through about 30 minutes of remarks. But the one thing you've all taught me out here, and what I've always loved about this place, is that community comes first, right? No one is bigger than the community. And all of us have the responsibility to remember where we came from and to keep pushing forward. So let's push forward, right? So there is a lot to unpack. And we have about 45 minutes to an hour, and we're gonna barely scratch the surface. And I'm down to answer any questions. I'm down here to engage anyone after. I ain't leaving until, I don't want anyone leaving here going, oh, I didn't ask him this question. I'm here. So I encourage you to think of questions and comments that will challenge what I say. Because this is what academic freedom is all about. And guess what? That's what makes this country amazing. But as with anything in American history, there's always something deeper. So right now, we see the headlines, we feel the pain, we hear the noise, we witness the fear and separation. But as I have tried to do with my work, we have to look past the breaking headlines through the eyes of history, through context, through memory. Because this country likes to call itself a quote-unquote nation of immigrants, but lately, it sure doesn't feel that way. And here's the thing, that phrase, a nation of immigrants, didn't just fall out of the sky. It came from President John F. Kennedy, right? I went to the JFK library to get this. So in 1958, the Anti-Defamation League published an essay by then Senator Kennedy highlighting the contributions of immigrants to the United States. He later expanded that essay into a book as he was preparing to push Congress to overhaul the nation's immigration laws. Now, for me, a nation of immigrants is required reading for any political nerd out there. So if there are any political nerds out there, am I the only one? History buffs? Definitely try to read that book. Because what's really interesting about that book is Kennedy wrote about how immigrants built this country through agriculture, construction, the economy, the sciences, and the arts, right? But he also wrote about the discrimination they faced. He called out the waves of the waves of nativism, sorry. He confronted the bigotry. And this was in the late 50s, early 60s, right? When we talk about what the professor said before, Francesca said before about the moment, right? César Chávez, the moment. John F. Kennedy, the moment, right? So there were decades of anti-immigrant abuse. And when we talk about the Bracero program, particularly against individuals of Mexican descent. And I don't have to remind people here in this area in California, about those years, because you lived them, right? For Kennedy, making immigration laws more equitable wasn't just policy, it was personal. He knew what bigotry looked like. He was of Irish descent, and the Irish faced it, right? It's why when I'm in Boston, because that's where I'm from, so many of my Irish friends sympathize with what is happening right now to Mexicans, Salvadorans, Colombians, Hondurans, Dominicans, Venezuelans, and so on and so on. And one thing, while my topic is serious, I need to say this, okay? I married into Boston Irish, so I've heard all those stories. And speaking about the Irish in Boston, you are all welcome for Mookie Betts, Dodger fans. I am still bitter about that. So enjoy Mookie Betts. But I saw a prediction that the Red Sox and the Dodgers are going to be in the World Series, so let's hope. It's opening day, little hope. But here we are, 60 years later, right? Kennedy's book, Nation of Immigrants, 60 years later. And there have been some victories for immigrant rights throughout those 60 years. But the fights are still the same. And the rhetoric, and I would venture to say the racism, has only gotten worse. Although American history will tell you that racism and rhetoric was always there. So this shouldn't surprise us, what we're witnessing now. The so-called nation of immigrants seems to be rejecting immigrants at every turn. So let me just read from the New York Times, and this was probably about 4 or 5 days ago. And I'm just going to read this story from just a couple of paragraphs from the New York Times. The Trump administration has opened a new phase in its immigration agenda, one that goes well beyond the mass deportation of undocumented immigrants. U.S. border officials are using more aggressive tactics, which the administration calls enhanced vetting, at ports of entry to the United States, prompting American allies like Germany to update their travel advisories. At the same time, the administration is targeting legal immigrants who have expressed views that the government believes threaten national security and undermine foreign policy. The tactics have unnerved foreign tourists and sent a chill through immigrant communities in the United States who say they are being targeted for speech, not for breaking any laws. I come from Boston. If you haven't seen the viral video of the last couple of days of unmarked ICE agents wearing masks, picking up a graduate student on the streets of Somerville, Massachusetts, which is right next to Cambridge, right outside of Boston. It's essentially part of Boston. After, at the end of Ramadan, celebrating her dinner, they just take her. That's what's happening, right? This is where we are now. And of course, I do think a lot about César Chávez during these times. So let me give you one specific example to try to explain what's César Chávez's complexity and what it means to me. So I hope there's fans of Latino Rebels out there. I hope so. I don't know. I founded that in 2011. Groundbreaking digital news site that eventually became part of Futuro Media with Maria Hinojosa. And I wanted to create a space where our communities could see themselves, where we could challenge mainstream narratives and dig deeper into stories that too often get flattened or distorted. One of those stories was about César Chávez. So in 2013, we published a piece called, and this is an actual headline, Dear Chavez Google Gate critics, César was no immigration nativist, not even close. It was in response to the manufactured online outrage that Google, remember they do like doodles? You ever see the doodles on Google? So they did a doodle of César Chávez on March 31st, 2013. And the conservative right wing completely co-opted it, right? It said Chavez was anti-immigrant and should never be celebrated. And this was also coming from Latinos, too. Plenty of them came after Latino rebels. They told us that we were not for our community, and we were like spreading disinformation. And that narrative, as complex as it was factually wrong. It was not accurate. In that 2013 piece, we pointed out that this anti-immigrant claim relied on a selective reading of history. Yes, no one is disputing the fact that the United Farm Workers and César Chávez, in its early days, called for enforcement against undocumented workers who were being used to break strikes. There were tip lines. There were members of the UFW calling INS back then, right? But to turn Chávez's views into proof that Latinos and him and labor were all against undocumented immigrants was false. But being the internet, as you all know, like, if it was out there, it was true because there is clips of him. You see them. With words that people that are against immigrants use now. Like César Chávez, there is video. So if you're looking at it out of context, and you're looking at it now, you're like, of course he was, why would we even celebrate this man? So I needed, as a journalist, to prove that wrong. So now this is the part where I add the dramatic, like, Aaron Brockovich music, or like, the intrepid reporter music. It took me 8 years to prove this wrong. 8 years. And I did it. And it's one of my proudest moments as a journalist. It was inside the Library of Congress. Imagine that. You ever see pictures of the Library of Congress, right? It's like Washington, D.C., right? And in 2021, 8 years later, we published a story called The 1974 Letter to the Editor, where César Chávez and the UFW promoted amnesty and legal residency for undocumented workers. So basically, it was a letter to the editor written by César Chávez himself to the San Francisco Examiner in response to the claims that he and the UFW were against undocumented workers and wanted them deported. So I have the letter, because I'm a history nerd too, and I believe in primary sources. And a lot of scholars have actually cited this letter, but no one's ever really published it. And the reason why it took forever to me to figure it out, and this is not a knock on scholarship, everyone was using the wrong date. So I was like, looking for something, was like, oh, he wrote it in 72. He wrote it on November 7th, 1973. And then I literally looked through thousands and thousands of pages of microfiche of all the California newspapers. It took me 8 years. And then I got the letter. And I published it, and I screen grabbed it. So I'm going to read the letter, because I think you need to understand César's words here. And I'm going to give you a disclosure. I'm not going to read some of the terms that he used back in the 70s, but I think it speaks again to the complexity that you said, that these were the words that were used. Questions about legality, aliens, things that we're hearing now, right? So let me read the letter. I'll read some of it. It's a letter to the editor. So it's literally on a piece of paper, letter to the editor, and he says, your editorial, San Francisco Examiner, claims that the United Farm Workers of America, FAL-CIO, shares the views of the current Attorney General of California on the problem of, insert slur here, okay, so I word. This is misleading. This is what César Chávez said. In fact, the Attorney General's views are not at all compatible with the interests of farm workers. He advocates the mass deportation of working, insert I word, mostly those from Mexico. This is a sentence from César Chávez in the newspaper. We are against such drastic and unfair measures. We advocate amnesty and support the efforts to obtain legal documents and equal rights, including the right to collective bargaining. This was 1974. The UFW favors the liberalization of immigration laws to make immigration from Mexico more equitable with that of immigration from Europe. And now this is where he makes his distinction. He goes, however, we cannot tolerate the growers' use of I words to break our strikes. This is how he says it. And I know it's the word, and when I read it, I'm like, here we are, and we're hearing it all the time. I'm just going to say it because I think you need to hear the primary. The illegal aliens are doubly exploited. First, because they are farm workers, and second, because they are powerless to defend their own interests. But if they weren't around being used to break our strikes and break our strikers, we could win those strikes overnight and then be in a position to improve the living and working conditions of all farm workers. We recognize them as our brothers and sisters. And the union's position is that they should be allowed to enter the United States as legal residents, but they should not be used as strikebreakers. César E. Chávez, President, United Farm Workers, Keene. That letter is real, it's public, and it's right there for anyone who wants to know the truth. And I would venture to say, like, this complexity is something that weighs us as Latinos, right? This is the push and pull. But César Chávez said it so clearly in 1974. It's like, if anyone ever told you again, just say, like, he wrote a letter in 1974, and here it is. And you can just Google it, and we screen grabbed it, and it's there. You can download it. You can share it. It's free for the world to use. So this is where we are. We know history is messy. We know people are complicated. But what isn't complicated, what is not complicated, and what should never be complicated is human dignity. And as complex as Chavez was, he was all about that. So let's here we are in 2025. Migrant families continue to be targeted for believing in the American dream. If there's one thing this country has done well, and this country has its issues, but one thing that it's done well, it's selling the idea that even with its moments of ugliness, the United States is still a place to attract new dreamers. But ever since the 1990s, we have been criminalizing migration. And both Republicans and Democrats have bought into it. So all you need to do is watch the State of the Union address that President Bill Clinton gave in 1995, I believe, where his rhetoric against migrants rivals that of our current president. Like, watch the video. There's even a campaign ad there in 1996 when he's running for president, where a narrator does the images, you know, you have all the scary, fear-mongering images, right? And the narrator says, President Clinton has deported more, you know, illegal immigrants than any other American president in U.S. history. That was in 1996. And that was just 10 years after an immigrants' rights victory under President Ronald Reagan. perhaps the greatest moment in immigrant rights since the 60s, right? We still talk about that, and I know there's so many families all over the country who are impacted by what happened in 1986. Then 9/11 happened. And migration became a national security issue. The conservative right has been hammering that point ever since. And while the left loves to talk about being a nation of immigrants and claims to protect immigrants, it has never fully delivered. We're still talking about comprehensive immigration reform, and guess what? That came from a book and an essay from 1958 that turned into a book in 1963. You read that book from then, from President Kennedy, and you're like, what has changed? And even when DACA was established in 2012, thanks to the power and pressure of undocumented youth, and we should all be applauding that work that happened 15 years ago. These so-called dreamers are now in their late 30s and early 40s, still fighting the fight. That future remains uncertain. DACA's still in the courts, right? And today we have Democrats framing immigration as a call for tougher border security and national security. They sound like Republicans, and they always have. So almost all of this has gone largely unchallenged, and it has enabled an immigration enforcement strategy that treats the entire immigrant community as a threat. Then you get the co-option of history with Chávez, because that's what happens. You're going to see this March 31st. There's going to be plenty of think pieces about César Chávez did not believe in immigration rights. He did. We need to end that debate, right? But we're here right now. And let's fast forward right now, because it's not like all of this was hidden, right? President Trump's first two campaign promises from the GOP 2024 platform, and I'm quoting, okay, were seal the border and stop the migrant invasion, and carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. It was right there in front of us. And this type of thinking, right, because I get a lot of questions like, well, why are Latinos still voting for Trump and all that? It's like, that was part of a campaign strategy. So I'm just going to read one paragraph of what I wrote in 2023 about what Trump has done. It's a campaign strategy. So it's like, but rather than appeal to all Latinos, and this for MSNBC, for my columns, Trump is playing up historical divisions that were there before he became the face of the Republican Party. There are plenty of Latinos who see privilege in their American citizenship, enough to the point that it creates real division. Battling Biden to a draw among Latino voters would be more than enough for Trump, and concentrating his pitch on some groups may be more effective than a one-size-fits-all Latinos approach. Such rhetoric is already working for Trump. Just recently, during his campaign rally in the very Cuban-American Florida city of Hialeah, the mayor revealed that he wanted to name a street after Trump. But let's be clear, and the facts show it. And I've been down there recently, and I see it. It's never been a security crisis. It's been a humanitarian one. Families, children, asylum seekers, people who have survived war, gang violence, climate disasters, and political collapse. People who still believe in the promise of this country, even if that promise has never been guaranteed to them. These are the people who are being vilified. They're not invading the border. They're being detained, deported, or stranded in legal limbo. They're being used as talking points by cable news hosts and stunts by politicians who ship them off like they're faceless numbers with no souls. And while we all argue about walls and sending troops to the border, people are dying. dying. People are disappearing. People are being processed like inventory. We've dehumanized this entire issue, and it's shameful. Consider this. Earlier this month, ICE conducted raids in New Mexico and apprehended 48 individuals. According to the ACLU of New Mexico, these individuals were, quote unquote, forcibly disappeared with no information about their whereabouts. Families left in the dark, no answers, no due process. Then the Trump administration invoked the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to deport over 200 Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador without due process because they had tattoos. One of them had a Real Madrid soccer tattoo. Had one judge saying, because they blocked this, one district judge said, Nazis get better treatment under the Alien Enemies Act. And then there's the abuse of immigrant women in detention at the Chrome North Processing Center in Miami, which one woman just called last week hell on earth. And I mentioned what happened in the Boston area, right? These are not exceptions. This is policy. And like I wrote a piece about the history of ICE a couple of days ago for MSNBC. It's a 22-year-old agency. I just want to read a couple of paragraphs from that. And I'm almost done. We're almost there. I'm going to tie it to Chavez in a second. I'm getting fired up. The brazenness of these latest actions and the political forces backing them have reached even more extreme levels. Under Trump's return, ICE has its strongest political ally yet. Enforcement is being ramped up with little regard for the courts, the justifications, or the consequences. But the speed and scale of expanded enforcement is only possible because of how ICE has been structured under a bipartisan consensus. The agency has long relied on subcontracted enforcement, including privately owned detention centers with poor oversight. These contractors profit from opaque systems with little accountability. When violations happen, blame is diffused. There's always someone else to point to. Meanwhile, the government, under both Republicans and Democrats, keeps cutting the checks for more immigration enforcement security. This is a critical moment to ask not just what ICE is doing, but what it was built to do. This should be a wake-up call for both immigrant communities and everyone who believes that due process and civil liberties must always be protected in this country. And still, with all that, millions of people still believe in this place called America and how it'll always be here to help and protect the most vulnerable. So how do we frame Chávez's legacy into this? Now, I read you all that. We talked about his complexity. I believe no human is perfect and will never be, but I'm comforted by some of his words. So I'm just going to read some of his quotes because I think you really need to see this and hear it. So he said once, "We cannot seek achievement for ourselves and forget about progress and prosperity for our community. Our ambitions must be broad enough to include the aspirations and needs of others for their sakes and for our own." Right? And then he said, "We need to help students and parents cherish and preserve the ethnic and cultural diversity that nourishes and strengthens this community. Don't forget where you came from. Value the dignity of work, and labor justice and immigrant justice are permanently linked together." That's me. The last three sentences were me. But I just took Chávez's quote and just, because I feel like this is what should be happening, right? So I just want to give one example of an organizer who's doing it. I don't know if you know Flor Martinez Zaragoza. She's 29 years old. She's a DACA recipient, recognizable by her eyeliner. She wears a black shirt in Spanish with immigrant crossed out in favor of indigenous. And according to this article, she became an heir to the dreamers of the Obama era, a farm worker at the age of 14. She gained prominence during the pandemic when she helped tell the stories of fellow farm workers battling raging wildfires out here in California. And you can see it, right? Their throats hurting, their employers refusing to provide them with masks. An Instagram video she shared as wildfires swept through Salinas, California, received close to 400,000 views. She's turned it into raising $650,000 in 2020 for masks for farm workers and school supplies. And she's continued her work. And even what just happened in the last couple months, she shared a video of farm workers in fields of green in a field backed by an angry orange smoke-filled sky, and the video featured the caption, "Fire and ice chasing them, and they still show up to feed you." You add a Bad Bunny song, it gets 7.5 million views. That's how you change. That creates impact. So pushing back when part of this country tries to dehumanize you, that is what they are doing. And in a lot of ways, that's what César Chávez did. And I don't know if you know, on March 31st, on Monday, the UFW is actually organizing a massive immigration and labor rights rally. And one of the images, and you can just see it on Twitter, one of the images, right? Right? It says, "A march for all workers, si se puede." And there, and I didn't put it on my screen, but you can see it later, it says, "Stop the raids. We pick the food. We feed America." So I'm not buying it that César Chávez was this nativist. And I will put me in any debate with Tucker Carlson or anyone else who wants to do that, because I got receipts, and I got my community. And that's why I share what I share. Chavez also said this once: "Being of service is not enough. You must become a servant of the people. When you do, you can demand their commitment in return." So if you care about labor, if you care about immigrants, if you care about civil rights, you have to care about it all. If you care about people, you don't leave them behind. Chavez again: "We draw our strength from the very despair in which we have been forced to live. We shall endure." Those words from César Chávez are just not a line for the history books. It's a challenge. It's a reminder to always uplift your community. Always. And that's what I'm going to keep doing. And I'm very grateful. Thank you so much. I want to talk to you all, and I appreciate your time. Peace. No questions? How do you want to do the question? All right, sure.
All right. So at this moment, we're going to welcome any questions. I'll walk around with the microphone so that way y'all can ask Julio some questions.
Or comments or
Comments.
challenges or anything.
You have one over here.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Tatiana. I'm a student in Professor Chavez Chaboya's class. And one, I'd like to thank you just for coming, because it's so wonderful to hear from a journalist that's so much a part of our community. And my question to you is, I heard you were talking about the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
And I'm a very big history buff.
Yeah.
So how did you know that that letter was there? I mean, I know that there's like different dates and...
What a great question. You know why I know why that letter was there?
How? Tell me, please.
Because of Chicano professors
Exactly.
that did the work
Yes.
in the 70s and the 80s and wrote these academic books that people like me or you or anyone else who was interested in this topic
Yes.
read, right? They did the work, right? I saw 2 examples of it being cited, and it was driving me, like, you know, I was obsessed with it,
Yeah.
right? When you get like, why can't I find this letter?
right? And I wasn't questioning the scholarship. I never questioned that the letter did not exist, because that was the other thing some people would say. It's like, well, those are Mexican-American activist professors. They're making the letter up. I'm like, no, they're not, because they're putting our community first. So I knew that letter always existed because I believed my community. You know what I mean? So like part of this, especially when it comes to academic freedom, and you know, I get criticized for being like, you're too biased because you like to talk about your people. I'm like, seriously? Right. Like, do they, I mean, I'll be honest, it's not, and I'm not trying to knock it for anyone. Do they do that to like an Anglo journalist who's talking about like whatever? You're biased because you're talking about your community. It's like, but we're biased. So I didn't give up because I didn't believe the co-option. And I just got really upset because I was starting to get it from like other Latino journalists I respected and voices who were like, stop, you know, you're a radical. Like, stop trying to recreate Chavez's legacy. And I said, I need to find this primary document to kind of like, in a way, like, shut everybody up. And it kind of, you know, I'm into basketball. Where's Tony? Like, Tony and I, you know, I'm in Boston and we're talking about, and like, that was like, I'm taking it to the hoop. I'm slamming this. I'm going to get the foul. And everyone in the arena is going to like scream. That's how I treated that. Because one of the things that Chavez told me and the professors and anyone else who's done the work before us is that we have power and we have voice. Yeah. And everyone in this room, you have power, you have voice, and you have people that back you up. So when I finally saw, you had to see me. I wish it was like, it felt like a Netflix movie. When I finally got to the microfiche, and I was looking at hundreds and hundreds of them that day, and I'm like, I found it. Man, I took a cop. It was like, how many copies can I make? How much does it cost to make copies? They're like $1. I'm like, yes, thank you. Here's $2. And so I felt like I finally like gave to his legacy as a journalist, because things like that get lost. Yes. Right? So always stay curious and just go for it. And that's what makes a great historian, a great journalist, and whatever. So like, and you're great.
Thank you for keep going and
you too.
And keep doing it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Someone over there.
Hi, my name is Alejandra. I just had a question. I was wondering if it's just in context of like immigrant as a slur, because I've never heard of that, because I'm very proud that I came from that. Yeah. And so this is the first time I've heard someone refer it like as it's a slur. And I was wondering, is it just context, or
I did not mean immigrant. I meant the legality of people. And I don't I don't like using that word, and it was very tough reading Cesar's words.
Because I was like, you said
No. I thank you for clarifying. I try not to use that word for a lot of reasons, because I believe, you know, and when I was doing In the Thick, and I was with Mariana Hossa for years, the political podcast that we co-hosted, you know, Elie Wiesel would say that no human being is illegal, right? It was weird to see the letter where Cesar Chavez uses like that word, you know, the I word, in the sense of like it was just like, I'm going to use it like 6 times in the letter. But then you have to think about, especially to what was brought up before. I mean, we didn't even plan this speech, and all the context came right before with the introduction. But it was a time, the anti-immigrant, like because of the Bracero program, because of what happened in the farm, like there was plenty of people in our community who were like, they're not us. We start questioning like who's legal or not, right? So Chavez used that language because it was the language that people were talking about in the 70s. It's still painful to see it for me in that sense, but I think the intent of the letter was, they are our brothers and sisters, right? But now I have to turn I can't, like now you have the federal government
Like, I can't even imagine how people feel when you see that word being tossed about now, like on cable news, on, from the Congress, from the White House. We're faceless, right? I mean, and the only way I can say to combat some of that is we have to tell ourselves that we're not. We're human. And I'm still kind of like hopeful because I still believe, it's better to be in physical spaces than like talking to screens. So I do feel hopeful. But thank you for asking that. If I apologize I wasn't being clear. It's just that I get so moved when I read that letter. I still get angry a little bit that he uses those words because I know it's like, César, that's not what you meant.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Does that help?
Yeah,
but it's a great question.
That.
Thank you.
That just like threw me off a bit. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah. No, I appreciate, like I said, challenge it. I thank you for challenging that. I appreciate you.
Thank you again for your time. I just want to add, when you mentioned Flor from The Dreamer, she has the nonprofit Celebration Nation.
Yes.
And there are local
Yes.
drop-off in LA too, so if you want to support, that's an opportunity as well.
Thank you for saying, Flor is amazing and incredible Instagram channel. And there's going to be a lot of activity on Monday, at the rally. I'm sure the UFW is like really, really pushing behind because of the 60th anniversary. But thank you so much for sharing that. Anybody else? Hey.
Yes, I'm Professor Constantine here at PCC.
Hi.
I just want to ask, where's the demonstration happening on Monday, and how can we support the demonstration?
It's in Memorial Park, and I know is it Delano? This is my East Coast. Delano. I got it right. No, I'm just kidding. It's in Memorial Park, 104 South Lexington Street in Delano. It's at 10:30 in the morning. If you follow the UFW, it's on Twitter. It's on their website. There's a registration link. It basically says, join UFW members and thousands of union members from across California as we march in Delano in solidarity with immigrant workers, RSVP, parking info, and how you donate to the march below. So it's all on the UFW site, but it's this Monday at 10:30 in Memorial Park.
Yes, and then secondly, when Europeans came to the U.S. initially, they were classified as settlers.
Yeah.
But then everyone else who came to the U.S. are considered immigrants. What is your take on the use of that word settler, and why do they not consider themselves as immigrants as well?
That's an excellent question. I could do another speech about the early roots of American history and settler colonialism. I think, and you see it now, in the sense of the history of this country has this traditional explanation of its founding, right? That we see it now in all the executive orders that are happening in this administration, where we come from European stock and all this, and this notion of the settlers, to me, has always felt like a humanization of that, because of where the America, like how one sector of America thought America was founded, right? And I think the history of this country has been all about the winners, the winners of this world, the people who see that they've grabbed the land and they've exploited labor and they're going to take control. And so this notion of the American sort of like expansionism has always been traditionally like celebrated, when in fact we know in history that America just took over a lot of land violently, whether it's with indigenous nations or whether it's like illegally invading Texas to create a war that literally took all the territory from Mexico. And a lot of that language that we've heard, when you see the current administration start talking about the Gilded Age in the 19th century, and we want to take over Greenland, and we want to take over Canada. Like, that has roots in American history, right? And it's racialized. It's, you know, I'm Puerto Rican, right? So one of the things that I always like to bring up, if you're really interested in how Puerto Ricans are viewed legally, in the legal lexicon, the insular cases by the Supreme Court at the turn of the century, at the turn of the 20th century, where there's a literal text in Supreme Court decisions that they came and took over places like Puerto Rico because they were racially superior, and we had to tame the quote-unquote savages. That thinking is here. That thinking has never gone away in this country. And what we're seeing now is sort of a tension in this country where we are in this room, we know where the demographic change is. Like, you're in a place where you see like an incredibly diverse place. And there's Americans who see that as incredibly positive, and then there's Americans who see that as a threat, right? And then they see that as a threat, and then they hide behind national security and foreign policy and state secrets. And then they can take a Venezuelan man. It just happened in Miami. A Venezuelan man was swept up. Nothing on his record. And he's now in an El Salvadoran prison. And you have the Secretary of DHS doing Instagram videos in front of, you know, these shaven people behind bars, saying, like, you're not allowed to come into this country anymore. But it's with the point I said in my remarks. It's like, I want to say be careful what you wish for. It's like, we've done such a good job saying, like, this is the greatest country in the world. What do you think people want to do, like, when they see the United States? So I do think this history of that question, how we label human beings, says a lot, right? You have settlers versus aliens. Think about that. Just think about those two words and what it conjures up. And now we have a state system that literally uses that word to describe people. And I think that's wrong. I just think that's morally wrong. Yeah. Hey.
Hi. My name is Raul. Thank you for coming. One thing that my colleagues tell me when being in a room with the quote-unquote opposition is you have to disagree well with them. And my question to you is, when you're dealing with folks, with not just folks who like clearly don't give a damn about our community, but also folks within our community who covertly don't have the same, you know, best interest that we do.
Yeah.
What is your approach?
My approach, and this is where I believe in, it's a great question, first of all, because it's so easy to just go online and just be like, you know, be told that, you know, you're wrong, blah, blah, blah. And so I've had these conversations. My approach is bring the knowledge, right? I found the letter. I've talked to fellow journalists from the community, from the Latino community, who wrote opinion pieces about, like, stop celebrating César Chávez because he quote unquote, like, didn't uplift our community, which, like, I'm not going to use the words. I mean, I'm trying to be kind. It's, you know, 10:15 in the morning, and I don't want my Bronx to come out. But reading that letter is a primary document, and I felt it in the room, right? That's what, like, it was pretty clear to me. So, like, bring the knowledge, bring the proof, and challenge them in a way to say, like, I got my backup. Where's yours? And in a way, do it in a way that's respect. I do it respectfully, but at the same time, when I see someone, like, trying to pretzel themselves out of like, you're wrong, like, just admit it. Be human. Like, it's okay to admit that you're not right about everything, right? And I think, like, we just have to look at ourselves and look at the fact, especially in Latino, we just focus on Latino communities, right? It's like, we're probably like, yes, you know, a Puerto Rican kid from the East Coast and a Chicano kid from, like, Los Angeles, we've grown up differently, but we have a lot more in common than what divides us, right? And then when you see, like, the rest of the world stereotyping us and like misinforming who we are and what we do, and like everyone thinks like, oh, we're just this or that, or we just speak Spanish or whatever. Like, at some point we have to put our community first. And I still believe that there are people who, even though we disagree in our community, if you frame it in the fact it's like, there's a bigger struggle here. There's a bigger fight. Because this country still does not understand us. And doesn't that piss you off? Because it sure pisses me off. And try to find that commonality. Because I have to say, when I've done that, and I'm talking about people that I'm ideologically opposed, like my opinions, and I try to put like my journalism aside from my opinions, my personal ideological opinions. But every time I've had to do it, and I'm talking about like Latinos in the Trump administration. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I get it. And I know I know your family fled Cuba, but like, guess what? Like, they're still deporting Cubans. You know what I'm saying? It's like, there's something bigger here. And so I think we have to really ask ourselves, it's like, I will support your point of view as long as you put the community first. Does that make, it's like, and it kind of puts them on a little bit of like a, yeah, you're right. Because then they remember where they came from a little bit. You know what I mean? And it's taken me 55 years to figure it out, and I'm still trying to like figure it out. But at least like, I come with the assumption of like, I'll say radical things like, we as a community still do not have power in this country. How do we get it, right? And then it's fascinating to watch like someone else be like, oh, you're right. But bring receipts. And don't come with the attitude of like, I'm gonna slay you. Although once in a while, like, when I found the letter, I'm like, yo, let's go. Like, I dunked. Like, I'm Jordan on the poster. So once in a while you get to celebrate your victories, but stay humble, stay respectful, and wake up every morning. Like, I wake up every morning, I'm like, what can I do for my community today? And that, even when things get hopeless, that's what drives me. So, yeah.
Thank you again for being here. I just am curious about, in your journalism, like this expectation of leaders being perfect, right?
Yeah.
Because I think with César Chávez, while we can agree that he wasn't a nativist, he certainly did use multiple slurs, not just the I word, but W word, right? Yeah. And so there is a layer that he truly was anti-immigrant, and thankfully he walked that back. But it's not nativist or your full support, right? He was kind of in the in-between. And so if we think about like these expectations of perfect leaders, I'm curious how you kind of approach that in your research and in your journalism.
First of all, it's an excellent question, because I think that's just a general like observation of how we as human beings look at the past. We've lionized everyone, right? I mean, so I try to put myself in the context of being a human being, right? So I look at my experience, I'm like, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, like I'm a professional. I've lost several jobs. Like, I haven't done any, some days I'm better than others. And I do think we have to, we would serve ourselves better if we were more honest with ourselves, with our heroes. You know what I mean? Like, we can question our heroes and still adore and love our heroes. Because I actually think that's what true love's all about, right? In the sense of like admiration. If you admire someone, you
kind of want to give them good advice. I'm like, hey, and if I was in 74, if 2025 Julio was next to César Chávez writing that letter to the editor in 74, it's like, hey, you might want to tone this, I see what you're saying here, but coming from the future, I can see why. But I also think we have to acknowledge the fact, and this is one of the things I've said, it's not just César Chávez. I mean, you take an organization like LULAC back in the day, this sort of we are creating an organization to show our Americanness. We're Mexican American, but we're, this sort of aspirational American thing where it's what I said in the piece, in the MSNBC piece, where there are politicians who take advantage of privilege and be like, you're one of us because you have it, and let's not worry about them. So that imperfection comes from the American experience in the sense of, again, I go back to the United States has done an amazing job in marketing the American dream, right? Now, I can argue that the American dream's got a lot of nightmares in it, but I still adore this country. I love this country. Here I am talking freely for now. In the back of my head, I'm like, it enters your head now, right? But at least this is academic freedom. This is a safe space. And so I understand the aspirational part of America and this aspiration of we want to put our heroes on that pedestal. But if we're not critically thinking and if we're not asking ourselves questions as individuals, because we all have the power here to figure it out, I would not want us to just accept something just to accept it because everyone else says it's acceptable. You know what I mean? In that sense of I do think when it comes to Cesar's legacy, when President Biden was like, oh, I have a bust of César Chávez back there, and I'm like, yeah, but you're still you have policies that are harming immigrant communities and you haven't changed much. I feel that to be appropriation, and we need to call things out like that. So we get to decide who are our heroes, and if our heroes are imperfect, then good, because it makes us more human as a community. And I think we're past sort of this. I'm encouraged about the future generations who are saying hey, wait a minute. I was like, I really hope you guys go back and be like, he was fine. He said some really good things, but I want you to do that. I'm talking about me, right? It's I want you to do that because it's about what you're thinking. And one of the things that, I come from the Jesuit tradition of questioning everything and they got expelled from everywhere. So I've been asking these questions for years. And I do think no perfection is just unattainable. And let's just stop, right? And let's just be honest. But will I go to my grave saying that César Chávez was on the right side of history? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great question. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Gerardo. Really appreciated the conversation piece of all of this. I think I came in to learn more.
Yeah.
So definitely anything I say, I hope you take it with that perspective.
Oh, no, I welcome, first of all, good for you for saying, but this is what it's all about, learning.
Yeah. Unlike a lot of my colleagues, I'm not a professor, don't consider myself
You're here.
a scholar, but I came with that idea, everything that I've heard growing up of César Chávez and trying to align myself with being proud of my heritage while being Mexican-American, being Salvadoran-American.
Yeah.
And then come to, critical thinking, you get older, you start seeing all these stories about how he did have this view of immigrants. And I think it's tough because what you're speaking about is attempting to uphold a man to not diminish a movement. And I think, and you might agree with something that I'm saying here, what's your take on the whole idea of idolizing one person to the point that you spend 8 years to prove other people wrong about this one person? And I'm sure you've done work about all of the movements, right?
Yeah.
But I think that there's something to be said about the way we idolize men that often lead movements.
Yeah.
And how we so wholeheartedly want to believe that, no, they were good men.
No.
Because if you find out a little bit something problematic, because that's what it is, not complex. I think when we use the word complex, we also give them a way out, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of see it, I was comparing it in my head to like artists and music.
Yeah.
So many artists have come out, that they've done horrible things.
Yeah.
And me, the whole idea of like, do we separate the artist from the music? I mean, for me, I don't have to listen to that artist's music.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take away from the contributions as a whole to maybe the music, R&B or hip-hop, right? They contributed something, just the way that these men contributed something to a movement. But it's a whole larger movement. So again, I think putting it out there to maybe discuss some things that maybe other people didn't want to say, and putting it out there to see your take on the idolization of man and one person.
Yeah, I'm already thinking about 3 more speeches based on what y'all are saying, and that's another one. Now, we could go back. I agree with what you're saying. Like, I totally get what you're saying, right? And one of the things that the reason I'll give you a couple of reasons. The reason why I spent 8 years trying to be like, I gotta do this, is because the amount of hate and vitriol that we got in 2013 to be like, you're wrong, right? And it just didn't sit well with me because I was getting all this hate that wasn't factually based, right? So the academic, like the scholar in me, like was like, I'm gonna write my thesis. It's like, I'm gonna prove you wrong. So like there was a little bit of me there. I will give you that. But I also think we have to step back and look at the 60s in general. And the idolization of men was like, it's not just César Chávez. It's like you name all the leaders and then who were the women behind them. Now, I know Dolores very well, right? And I hug her, when I see her, and it's like, and I understand her grace, right? Whenever I interview her, Dolores, and I know there, just to give that one example, like of an idolization, it's like, yeah, Dolores Huerta was the driver of this movement. César did a lot, and he might have been the public face, but women were there, right? But I chose for this today to go, because what I'm seeing is that the same claims are being made about him, and there's bigger megaphones now. Tucker Carlson, like Steve Bannon, like Steve Miller, like all these right-wing like podcasts that have popped up and have created this ecosystem that is just spouting bad journalism. And I see it in our communities in podcasts now, where they're citing things that are just wrong, right? So the journalist in me is like, you're wrong, right? So I've been really like almost like immersed in this because I see it coming back, right? So sometimes one of the things when we get as humans, it's like, I do, like, you stay focused. I want to thank you for raising another very important issue that if I had another hour to do another speech, I would do it, and it would be exactly what you're saying. Like, I do think I'm the idolization of men in our community, like, that has to break. Like, it's over. Like, it needs to just stop. And the only way I can do it as a dad to my son is be like, it's done. Because I don't want what I got from the men in my life, like my grandfather, my dad, that it didn't sit right with me. So the only thing I can do is like, I can stop the cycle and hope that the next generation can continue to improve as men, right? And so I take it deeply in the sense of that. but that's a class. Are you going to teach it? Are you going to write about it? I'd love to hear more. Like, you should, I mean, you say you're learning, but I think you have something here that's like really, really important to cascade, and I think it's important to continue to chip away at it, especially from the perspective that you're saying. I hope I answered that. I mean, it was a good question. That was really good. Yeah, no, it was really nice. I appreciate it. Anybody else? Good? I hope you enjoyed it. I get exhausted after this, but we good? All right. Well, thank you. I'll just sit here for a little bit if you want to say hi, but I appreciate you. Thank you so much. It's been an honor. I didn't even drink my water.
Thank you, Julio, for sharing your work and bringing your lens about how the intersection